All right, I think we're recording. And how's it going, Professor Seji? We are doing our group discussion project for you now. And what we did is we took the brain and we each took a region, 5 regions, and we decided to do a little research on how each region is associated with memory or memory function. And I'll just kick it off. I took the amygdala, and we remember from that super cool podcast that you made us listen to on the girl whose amygdala got crystallized and had no capacity for fear, which was pretty cool. The amygdala has some stuff to do with emotion. Fear is a powerful emotion. So, no surprise, whenever I started my research, the amygdala's role in memory is actually linked to emotion. And sort of to bunch together a whole lot of scholarly work way too quickly, emotional arousal activates the amygdala. And the amygdala takes what is called emotional salience, the emotional salience of an event. And I'm going to read the definition of that because I had never heard of it before. Emotional salience is defined by the valence, which is negative to positive, or arousal, calming to arousing on a scale of an experience, is a biologically adaptive cue that can influence how an event is remembered and how it is possibly integrated into the memory. So the amygdala takes this into account and sort of sticks an emotional tag on a memory so it can be better recalled later. And believe it or not, we decided to try and find if we could find an example of our region in like pop culture. And in 2016, someone actually made a short film called Amygdala. And I thought it was going to be like a horror movie or something like that. It's not a horror movie at all. It's literally about exactly what I was saying. It's like this film school project. It's 10 minutes. It sucks. It's super boring, but it's 10 minutes of exactly what I was just talking about. Um, what it is these two British girls that get into a fight in the street at night about nothing, doesn't matter. One walks away, starts getting drunk by herself, and every time she rounds a corner, um, she finds herself in a place that she has a strong emotional reaction to. And that reaction takes her down like a memory rabbit hole. So she has a flashback every time she goes to a new location that has to do with um, like an ex-girlfriend, and every place is like a different memory. It's like one's happy, one's sad, they're getting together, they're breaking up. It's terrible. It's not very good. I don't recommend it, but it was like a perfect little example of the amygdala, emotion, and memory. So I thought that was pretty cool to find something that correlated so directly. That stuff, the amygdala, emotion, memory, is sort of like old news in um, research circles. I think it's fairly well studied and pretty universally agreed on. I did find one newer line of study that I thought was pretty interesting, and it was done in, I think it was UC Irvine. Um, and these researchers, they took a handful of epilepsy patients who were going to have some electrodes implanted in their brains to monitor seizure activity. And since they were going to do that anyway, they decided to do a little memory experimentation on them with the electrodes. What they did is they showed them a series of objects, and sometimes with an object, they would send an electrical pulse into the amygdala, and sometimes they didn't. Now, the current was supposedly so low that it was completely imperceptible. So it didn't cause any sort of conscious response. It wasn't painful. It didn't cause an emotion of any kind or any kind of physical response. And it turns out the patients were able to remember the objects that were paired with an amygdala stimulation much better than they were objects that were not paired with amygdala stimulation. So I thought it was kind of cool that the amygdala seems to have a role in memory beyond emotion. If it's activated by an emotion or anything else, it aids in memory recall. And so I thought that was pretty neat. That's what I got on the amygdala. So I'll pass it off to the next person, whoever wants to go next. Xavier or Ariana, whoever wants to take it. Take it away. Next break. Everybody's muted.
All sorry. So I got some things to, if I can go next, if that's cool. Some things that are actually connected, because like I studied the hippocampus, and the amygdala and the hippocampus are basically right next to each other. They're in the limbic system, and the hippocampus is very much affected. The memory that, well, let me start all over again. So the hippocampus is basically part of the memory that we use that's used for not storing explicit memories, but it's basically a way for us to process our explicit memories. And it's like basically a proper processing area where basically explicit memories go into sort of deep storage, essentially, which is in the cerebral cortex. And it's connected to the amygdala because it's responsible for like spatial memory. And so spatial memory is very much connected to emotion, which is connected to the amygdala as well. But yeah, it's basically an extremely important part of our memory system. And there's been several case studies of the effects of when things go wrong with the hippocampus, such as when the hippocampus is completely removed, such as in the case study of HM, which we discussed in class. And that was the study where basically I think he was in his early 30s. A man was experiencing seizures, and with experimental surgery, they completely removed his hippocampus. And the results of it turned into like a lifelong case study, essentially, of this man, because it took away his ability to store short-term memory or explicit memory. So any memory of like doing anything or numbers or facts or anything like that, he just completely was not able to remember. But he could remember long-term stuff. So everything before the surgery, he could remember his entire like early memories and history in that sense. So that was a really interesting study. And because it's kind of like, yeah, it's kind of like when a story loses its narrative, or when a narrative loses its story, what are we, you know? It totally takes into question like who are we actually as humans. And I think as when you take it into the cultural sector, I mean, like people are obsessed with this idea, you know, what happens when we're not able to process our memories? What happens when we lose our memory banks completely? Which can also happen with issues with the hippocampus. You can either have, let's see here, you can have anterograde amnesia, which is anterograde amnesia is basically when you're not able to remember the present. And you have retrograde amnesia, which is when you're not able to remember the past, basically. I was like, because I'm obsessed with film, I was looking into different films that basically took this into subject. And one of my favorite David Lynch films is Mulholland Drive. I don't know if you guys know that film, but it's sort of basically a somewhat of a movie about retrograde, kind of retrograde memory loss. Because a woman, she gets into a really bad car accident, she loses her memory, and she basically is trying to find herself, essentially find out who she is. She's totally lost. There's been a big crime. She knows she's involved. She doesn't know how. But the interesting thing is the way that the film is shot, it's actually shot from a retrograde amnesia point of view, in the sense that the viewer can see her life story, and the story makes sense up to a certain point. And then after that point, the story makes no sense. And then all the characters start switching around. When you think you know one character is one person, then suddenly that character turns into another person that's in the film, and it just totally screws with your head. And I think it's actually a comment on amnesia in general, but also the different types of amnesia. So that was my one cultural moment. That and Memento, because I love Memento. It's a great movie on retrograde amnesia. But in any case, the hippocampus is extremely important. And yeah, it's It's also, there's other ways that the hippocampus can be eroded. One way is through Alzheimer's disease. Hippocampus is affected because we get like basically lesions in our hippocampus that affect, for example, you can see the first stages of Alzheimer's when people have a hard time, when they don't know where they are. They lose their ability for spatial, basically spatial memory, or when they basically can't remember what they did like 5 minutes ago, or short-term memory is completely gone. That's another example of when the hippocampus starts to degrade. And actually, as we get older, our hippocampus does tend to shrink and we start losing our ability to remember as well. And you can actually measure, apparently you can measure the hippocampus in size to see how healthy that part of your memory actually is. So those were some of the interesting things I found out about the hippocampus, studying that particular part of memory.
Cool. Who wants to go next?
I think I'll go next. So I researched about the cerebellum. And so the cerebellum is located in the back of the brain. And although it takes up only approximately 10% of the brain's volume, it contains over 50% of the total number of neurons in the brain. And so it has about 4 different functions, which one of them is balance and posture. The cerebellum is important for making postural adjustments in order to maintain balance. Through its input from vestibular receptors and proprioceptors, it modulates commands to motor neurons to compensate for shifts in body position. And the second is coordination of voluntary movements, which one major function of the cerebellum is to coordinate the timing and force of the different muscle groups to produce fluid limb or body movements. The third function being motor learning, which the cerebellum plays a major role in adapting and fine-tuning motor programs to make accurate movements through a trial and error process, like learning to hit a baseball or trying to learn how to ride a bike. And the fourth function is cognitive functions, which although the cerebellum is most understood to its motor control contributions, it is also involved in cognitive functions such as language, learning a new language, kind of thing. And so with the cerebellum, it has 2 major parts, the cerebellar nuclei and the cerebellar cortex. So the cerebellar nuclei has nerve cells deep within the cerebellum that send information from the cerebellum out to the body. And the cerebellar cortex receives information from the brain and body and sends signals back to the rest of the brain, which enables accurate and well-coordinated movements. So if you damage your cerebellum, basically, you just won't be able to do normal things like maybe touch your hair, your head, anything, that kind of thing. It's also been connected to Parkinson's disease, that kind of thing. I didn't really find anything like this in pop culture. I feel like it's mainly just kind of like not knowing how to move your body properly kind of thing. But yeah, that's it.
It's not surprising. I couldn't believe I found anything that had anything to do with an amygdala, you know? What are the odds of that? But, well, cool. Very, very good. Who's up next?
I'll take it off right now.
All right.
So the subject that I had to do the research on is the prefrontal cortex, which is located in the frontal region of the brain, which is also part of the frontal lobe. The prefrontal cortex participates in cognitive functions such as thinking, reasoning, planning, and decision-making. It also occupies about 29% of the brain of the cerebral cortex. The psychological term for functions carried out by the prefrontal cortex is called executive function, which executive function is pretty much the ability to distinguish from good, bad, better and best, from same and different. And all of this occurs in the prefrontal cortex. In other words, all the functions that we rely on pretty much that we rely on for a healthy relationship comes from the prefrontal cortex. So also the prefrontal cortex is also linked up with short-term memory. So whenever you're trying to keep information for a short period of time, all the information goes in from the frontal cortex, and it travels up to many regions of the brain. Then the process, to process this memory, the ability to hold and manipulate information in the mind is the process called working memory. So working memory is pretty much retaining information that you will use on pretty much when you're doing a daily task. It's information that helps you do the working task that you're gonna do. So I was reading that damage to the prefrontal cortex will go ahead and alter your abilities and your personality. So there was a case that we read in class about Phineas Gage, which he was a worker. So he was a railroad foreman, and then on his job he accidentally shot himself with a rod through the brain, which damaged his prefrontal cortex. Then by doing so, his personality changed. So he was a hard worker. Then damage to his frontal cortex made him change a lot. So he started using more profanity. He started changing the way that he thinks and acts. So the only information I pretty much found about working memory is that working memory is the part of short-term memory that is concerned with immediate conscious, perceptual, and linguistic processing. So pretty much damage to, so that's where all the information comes from the frontal lobe, and it goes to many regions of your brain, leading to the hippocampus, which is the storage of memory. And then that's about much information I was able to find on the prefrontal cortex, because mainly all the information stored goes to the hippocampus.
Super cool. I think they ought to make a movie about Phineas Gage. Wouldn't that be cool?
They should.
That'd be all
They
sorts of good
should.
shit you could do with that. Like, you know, you show the thing flying through his face, and then you got the whole recovery process. Something for
All the
everybody.
blood.
Was there research done on his memory, if that was affected at all? Because I don't really remember that. I just remember them saying that his personality completely changed. But did he actually have memory issues after having this rod shot through his head?
Yeah, I think his memory was pretty okay, wasn't it?
Which is interesting. I mean, it goes to
I'm
show
pretty
how
sure, like,
complicated.
his long-term memory wasn't that damaged. I'm pretty sure he was able to remember everything, but
Yeah.
everything for short-term, I'm pretty sure it was damaged.
Okay.
Weird, man.
Yeah.
All right, Alexa, you're up, cowgirl. Let's do it. Alexa. Oh no, Alexa, you're echoey.
I
Yeah.
can't hear anything.
Can you hear me now?
Not really.
Only in like a Darth Vader kind of way.
What about now?
Yes.
That's good.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Cool. Okay. So my part was the basal ganglia. So exactly what the basal ganglia is they're a group of structures that are like deep within the cerebral hemispheres, and they're just in there. They're basically like a group of nuclei deep within that hemisphere. So that's a little bit background. So what is it like really responsible for? It's responsible for like eye movement, motor skills and stuff like that. So you could already guess like the basal ganglia is a part of the implicit memories, such as like motor memories. So let's say you're riding a bike, you already know how to ride a bike because your memory is like, you know how to ride it. Or let's say you forget, you played the guitar like a long time ago and you pick it up years later, you're gonna know like a little bit of where to put it because of your motor skills and your implicit memories of that. It's damage to the basal ganglia might actually cause a lot of problems, which is like controlling your speech, your movement, and your posture. So some of these combinations are actually are symptoms of Parkinson's. So if you damage that, you probably have that.
Mhm.
Some pop culture references. I mean, any X romance movie with an X involved. If you hear a few songs, your implicit memories will associate your that song with your ex if you heard it a lot with them. So any romance movie, honestly. Um, so what is it like in psychology? Uh, the basal ganglia is also involved like in it's linked to motivation. It's linked to motivation, which is like really like kind of cool to see that it might be responsible for that. I mean, that's about it with memories and like the background I found. So
Oh,
I
cool.
found it really fascinating how implicit and explicit memory, how they operate on like parallel levels almost, where you don't actually have to remember doing something to actually know how to do it. It's absolutely fascinating idea, actually. And that's what I was finding also with the research on the hippocampus, that, it's just, it works on such a dual level that, like with the case study of HM, that he could just completely not be able to remember day-to-day stuff, but he could learn a skill still. Even though he never actually remembered learning the skill, he could actually do that, actually do that thing that he learned without actually having remembered learning it. So it just shows like that duality of those, two systems. It's interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Because isn't that pretty much like brain plasticity? So pretty much like if you damage some part of your brain, the other regions of the brain would pretty much would find a way to make those things work together.
Yeah.
It might be as well. Yeah. I mean, it seems like maybe because he damaged his explicit memory zone, maybe his implicit memories were, I don't know, maybe that somehow was enhanced in some way or another. I don't know. Maybe he was
Wait,
really.
how old
Huh?
is he? How old is he?
Well, I think when he had the surgery, I can't actually remember, but I think he was in his early 30s.
Really?
And he had the surgery because of epilepsy attacks. So, and they studied him up until he died, he lived until he was like 82. I mean, that's kind of insane to have basically almost like a lobotomy and then like still be able to live so long. I mean, he must have lived in a very protected, like, way, very controlled way, because otherwise he would have probably just killed himself fairly easily without being able to remember anything, which is, brings back to the whole Memento. Did you guys ever see that movie, the Memento film?
Yeah.
So you can imagine if you can't remember things from moment to moment, how dangerous that is for an organism. I mean, how do you survive if you can't remember what you did last?
Especially if criminals are out to get you.
Yeah, totally. Especially in our dog-eat-dog world that we live in.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It just blows my mind that you can do anything to the brain and not just die immediately. Like they can crack open your head, cut out a whole chunk of your brain, and like you're pretty much fine. Like I don't understand that. That's ridiculous. I kind of don't believe it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, or the fact that they can remove a part without you actually even feeling it. You don't feel pain when something's removed.
Yeah, that's weird too, right? How there's no nerve in there. That's strange.
Yeah. Anyway.
All right, cool. Anybody got anything to add? We're kind of well over our time limit here, so anybody?
Nope.
All right. So I will stop recording. Oh, fuck. Guys.
Was it recording?
We weren't recording.
You're playing.
Oh my God. I'm just kidding. We were recording, but you felt fear, and you will remember that forever because it's affected by your amygdala.
Oh my God. I will always remember that. I almost had a heart attack.
Okay, good job, everybody. I'll see you in class.
Thanks, Trey. Oh, do we
Okay.
need to, do we actually, wait, Trey, are you going to be the one to submit this then?
Yeah, I'm going to submit it right now. As long as I can figure out how. If I can't, I'll reach out.
Okay, cool. So we
He
don't
said to
need
make-
to. Uh-huh.
Okay.
He said to put it in the YouTube file, like to upload it on YouTube and then just send him the link.
Oh, okay. All right. Cool.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thanks a lot, Trey.
All
Appreciate
right,
it.
guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right.
Have a good
Yes, sir.
night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.